Dolan and a few other friends found their principal jerking into what looked like porn. Was he traumatized? Probably, since Dolan can't get the image out of his head of jizz going everywhere. Luckily, the principal got fired, but not after a day or two of the incident. Another time, Dolan and a couple of different friends were walking to the library where they spotted a few empty beer glasses, and the principal sitting on his desk, vomiting. That was a pleasant sight.
Ramona and a girl she was dating at the time went on a date to a restaurant they had heard good things about. After the date, they were driving back to her house, which was about 35 minutes away. Ramona's stomach started rumbling. Apparently, something was not agreeing with her. She decided to let out a quiet fart to relieve herself, but that's when it went horribly wrong. She accidentally pooped her pants. It was the longest drive she had ever had to endure, and by the time they arrived at her apartment, her date had figured out what had happened. Luckily, they had a good laugh about it, but she will never live it down. When Sidious was 21, he and his girlfriend lived in an apartment together. One weekend, Sidious went away to visit an old friend, so his girlfriend decided to use the time alone to meet up with a new online friend. Sidious was fine with this because the person she was meeting was female, and the site was designed for platonic meetups, not dating. But when Sidious got home from his weekend away, his girlfriend immediately broke down crying. She told him that she and the girl she met up with had kissed. They talked it over and decided to stay together and work on the relationship. She assured Sidious she loved him and said that she was definitely straight. The next morning, Sidious's girlfriend said she changed her mind and wanted to break up. Turns out the more she thought about it, the more she realized she actually had feelings for the girl. Sidious was crushed. When he was 11, Nixium and his friends went walking in a park one day when something caught their attention. A random guy who wore a tutu, cat ears, a bra on top of a tank top, and tight shorts was walking around. Nixium took out his phone and recorded the guy while laughing hysterically. The guy saying, "I'm gonna play with myself," over and over as he walked around. Everyone watched as the guy continued to sing and prance around in his weird costume. After the guy walked out of the park, Nixium went home and showed his family the video. His brother laughed so hard that he began to cry and wheeze at the same time. Nixium couldn't help but post the video on his Facebook. When Pandora was 13, she was friends with some emo kids and metalheads. One time, when she was at a school dance, a mosh pit broke out on the dance floor. While this happened, Pandora and her friends were outside eating pizza and drinking Mountain Dew. Even though they were outside, nowhere near the dance floor, a teacher found them and blamed her for causing a ruckus. They said it was clearly her fault, and she was forced to clean up the gym and got a whole week of detention.
Helbin is a very lazy employee who likes taking frequent toilet breaks to screw around on his phone. One time, Helbin visited the restroom for the 10th time that shift. This time he actually needed to pee, so he stood in front of the urinal and went to town. When he finished, he zipped his pants up and squealed in pain. He looked down and saw the skin of his testicles had gotten caught in his zipper. He tried for 5 minutes to unzip it, but it refused to budge. Eventually, after a lot of force and a lot of pain, he finally got it unstuck. Needless to say, Helbin was very sore down there for the rest of his shift. Yo, that is probably one of my biggest fears.
One time in 9th grade, Honeybits got the hiccups in math class. She has unusually loud hiccups, so it was hard to ignore. But that's not why she got detention. Her math teacher had a solution for her little problem. She told Honeybits to go into the hall, hold her ear, and hop on one foot to cure them. She had no idea how it would cure the hiccups, but she did as she said. Little did she know, her fellow students could hear her and were giggling. Her math teacher came out red-faced and angrily gave Honeybits detention for disrupting class, for doing something she told her to do!
Andy Mations and her boyfriend Adam were together for 2 years before Andy had to move. They kept up their relationship over Skype after that, but one day they both went to a local event, and Andy's best friend was there as well. Andy's friend tried to avoid her, but eventually they started chatting. That's when Adam's little brother came over to them and said, "My big brother's got a girlfriend!" Andy pretended not to know and said, "Who's that?" To which Andy's friend said, "It's me." Apparently, she thought Andy and Adam had broken up already. Andy gave her friend a death stare and walked over to Adam and slapped him. After that, they really were broken up. When Telep was in 6th grade, he talked to a classmate, Derek, at recess. Derek asked,
"Have you ever saw that?"
Telep replied, "Yes. Yes, and you are not using proper grammar." It should be, have you seen that? Later on, Tulip was sent to the office where he saw Derek crying. The principal asked him if he did anything mean to Derek, to which he replied, "No." Then Derek said,
He corrected my grammar.
Needless to say, Tulip was shocked, standing there in disbelief. The principal asked why he corrected his grammar. There was an awkward silence until Tulip replied, because it was improper. That was when the principal gave him a death stare, sending him back to his classroom. He ended up getting detention afterwards, all for correcting someone else's grammar. Salty Squid had a dream where a giant banana grabbed him and ate him. Just swallowed him whole for no reason at all. When he was in the giant banana's stomach, a small banana walked towards him and asked, "How do you like being eaten?" Over and over again. It was so annoying, Salty Squid just broke down and decided to eat the small banana. When he ate the small banana, he woke up.
One night, Hellbent was walking home when he saw one of his neighbors was having a party. This neighbor lived in a very small trailer, but that wasn't stopping them from throwing one of the biggest parties Hellbent had ever seen. In fact, as Hellbent was walking by, the neighbor ran outside and invited him in as if they knew him. Hellbent said,
Alright, fuck it.
and went inside. The trailer was packed with people, and it was being crammed with even more. Hellbent helped himself to some beer and watched as a tiny midget lady climbed onto the dining room table and did a striptease.
You know, on the table, you look like you're taller than I am.
It was by far the weirdest thing he had ever seen on his street.
One time, Kyle got caught putting signs on the doors of classrooms saying that the principal wanted teachers to take all their classes to the main hall. He even copied the principal's signature from a letter he had, and he got caught when a snitch told the teacher what had happened. His punishment was isolation, which is when you sit in a little cubicle doing math and English exercises all day. The only time you get up is when they let you go to the toilet twice a day. He was in isolation for 3 days. This story proves Kyle wasn't always a sharpshooting badass. As a kid, he spent the weekend at a Boy Scout shooting camp out, where he and 4 others got to shoot clay targets. When Kyle's turn came to shoot the shotgun, he shouted, "Pull!" and the manager launched a clay target into the sky. As he went to shoot, Kyle's finger slipped and he accidentally switched the gun to safety mode. Seeing that it didn't fire, Kyle decided it would be a good idea to look down the barrel and pull the trigger a few times. While doing this, he accidentally switched the safety off and the gun fired. Luckily, he didn't blow his whole fucking face off, but he did lose a few hairs. Honeybits was on the subway with her friend and her mum. In their cab was a thin white dude who looked like he was going to lose a fight with a worm. He was on his phone and at first he was just whispering. Honeybits noticed that the people around him were giving him weird looks as he started getting angrier. Eventually he stood up and yelled into the phone, "Put the money in the bag and get out of there." He angrily got off at the next station. Unfortunately, that was Honeybits' stop as well. Honeybits was walking behind him when a homeless looking man walked up to him and asked, "So what happened?" The man said that Tyler didn't get the money to buy the drugs. Honeybits, her mum and her friend all stopped and stared until the men turned around and yelled, "What do you want, girls?" After that they ran off.
The scariest thing Pringle ever witnessed was something outside of his bedroom window. Because he's into paranormal stuff, Pringle thought,
Oh, maybe it's a banshee. I guess I'm gonna die.
but then he fell asleep and his dream was that he died and went to hell. After about an hour, Pringle woke up and saw eyes all around his room. He blinked and they also blinked, and then a demon thing whispered something in his ear. Pringle was pretty sure it was in Latin, and that's his tale of sleep paralysis.
Tulip and one of her friends were walking to her car one night when they ran into a guy they had never met before. He was trying hard to get into her car, but it was locked. Tulip asked the guy what the fuck he thought he was doing. It turned out that he had been sleepwalking, so Tulip let him into her car where he could finish sleeping. After that night, they became friends. Number 1 was submitted by Small Doggo 234. One day, Froggy was browsing in a store when she saw a kid with his parents. The kid was hitting his parents with a dildo. Each time he hit them with it, he made a jolly sound. Froggy watched as the kid continued hitting his parents for at least half an hour when she decided to talk to him. When she asked him for his number, he wrote it down on the dildo. They're still best friends.
On his 7th birthday, Zaraganva's parents were on the porch with ice-cold beers. When his grandma went to the bathroom, and when his grandpa wasn't looking, Zaraganva grabbed his grandma's beer and ran back into the house. He chugged the entire bottle, thinking it was going to make him do funny things because he was just starting to learn about alcohol. Well, he was right. He tumbled down 13 steps, giving himself a concussion. When he woke up 3 hours later, he was laying in bed with his mom standing next to him. She was checking his vitals, his breathing, his heart rate, his hearing, and of course, she was yelling at him. She told Zaragamba that, apparently while he was drunk, he went into the road bare-ass naked with a pan. He banged the pan on the sidewalk while yelling, "The chickens are coming! The chickens are gonna fuck all of you!" He didn't remember any of it, and was grounded for 2 months.
When Pringle was in high school, he had a really cool math teacher who was especially accommodating to students' needs. For instance, Pringle always had a ton of problems with math, so one day his teacher asked him what kinds of things he liked. Pringle proceeded to tell him about his love for games like Valkyria Chronicles and Dragon Age, and the next day, his teacher came in with some worksheets with Valkyria Chronicles and Dragon Age themed questions. Pringle could tell that all the teacher did was read up on some Wikipedia article about the games, but it was still super awesome that the teacher went through all that effort just for him. Dolan, his mom, and his older brother were walking down a dark road at night. His older brother had a bouncy ball in his hand, and suddenly, it bounced its way through a weird-looking gate. They walked through this gate to see if they could find the bouncy ball, but instead, they found this weird gargoyle that looked like a pterodactyl without wings. It smiled as it handed the bouncy ball back to Dolan's brother, and then it bit his arm. Dolan's brother was about to scream, but he turned to white stone before he could. Then, it shattered into a million pieces. The pterodactyl gargoyle started walking towards Dolan when suddenly, he woke up. Dolan spent the night in his mom's room, and in the morning, he gave his brother a big hug.
Honeybits had an evil uncle when she was 14. One night, she was left home alone, sitting on the living room couch when her dog sat up. It let out a low growl as Honeybits heard what seemed to be a footstep on the back porch. She turned off the TV and got on the floor to hide from whoever might be outside. She crawled to the window and peeked through the blinds. The moon outlined the hulking figure of a man who had a large hunting knife gripped in his hand. He gave her a dead stare. She could just make out his face enough to know that it was her aunt's ex-husband, and he was grinning like a man possessed. Quickly, she pulled back from the window and laid flat on the floor. "I know you're in there, you little bitch," he teased. At the sound of his voice, Honeybit's dog went crazy and barked and lunged at the window. She decided to run to her parents' bedroom. Suddenly, her ex-uncle rammed the back door with his shoulder. Honeybits was just barely able to get her hands on her father's 9mm when she heard the door give way. Backed into the corner of her parents' bedroom, she heard him yell as the dog tore into him. She heard the solid thud of him kicking the dog, then the footsteps came up the hall. Her uncle screamed that he was gonna slit her scrawny little throat. Then there was a deafening blow to the door. She took aim. Then with another loud blow, the door flew open. She shot her ex-uncle 7 times, but he didn't die. There were 4 blossoms of blood forming on his back and 3 new holes in the bedroom wall. Moments later, Honeybits heard sirens and saw flashing lights. The police entered her house, having been called by the neighbors. Her uncle's limp body was handcuffed and taken away in an ambulance.
The dumbest thing anyone ever thought about in Nixium's family were guns. One summer evening, when he was camping with his family, the topic of guns came up. Nixium's brother made the remark that guns kill people. Their dad, being a smartass, decided to prove him wrong. He said, "I'll be right back." A few minutes later, their dad came out of his tent with a shotgun. He aimed it at his brother's face. Then, after a minute, lowered it. He then told Nixium's brother, "Guns are the means to kill. I choose whether or not to pull the trigger. The gun itself is sentient." Nixium's brother fainted while Nixium pissed himself.
One time when he was very young, Pringle was playing in the sand pit at school when two of his friends appeared out of nowhere yelling, "Shark! There's a shark!" He decided to follow them to find out what they were talking about. They ran to the school swimming pool and they pointed. Behind the gate was a dead shark laying next to the pool. Everyone was so confused, and rumors were flying here and there and everywhere about how it had lived in the pool and jumped out and attacked a student. And nobody ever figured out how the shark even got there.
A friend of mine told me the story, and it sounded so ludicrous, I didn't even think it could have been real. But turns out it was true. One day, she was driving along, doing the legal speed limit, and got pulled over by a cop. She had no idea what she'd done wrong, so of course she was confused when the cop walked over to give her a ticket. She asked him, "What's the charge, officer?" He looked at her, smiled, and then said, "Driving without my number," and winked. This is the kind of thing you see in a bad porno. I didn't really think it would happen in real life, but it was actually a thing that happened. I really hope this crooked cop lost his license.
Every Christmas, Legna's family hosts a gigantic Christmas parties at a gigantic church, and they usually hand out presents and hot food. Sometimes Legna and the other kids would play hide and seek, going up as far as 2 stories. Above there is a dark mansion-like room that no one uses. They used to hear growling and gagging noises from there. One night, Legna and his friends Lady Bot and Tullip had the nerve to hide up there, and it was fine at first. It was dark, but nothing happened for the first 5 minutes, until they heard a little growl and some tapping. Legna said quietly,
"What the hell was that?"
His friends were too scared to move. They knew they weren't alone, and whoever that was out there was not friendly. Then they heard their full names being called. They didn't move, and Tullip said,
"I don't want to die."
Then they heard loud pawing at the door, and to their horror, they saw an awful-looking figure. They screamed and then ran out of there before hearing the window break. They ran down 2 flights of stairs before seeing their parents and passing out. Later, when they told someone, the person said that a depressed man had hung himself at that window in 1901.
When Ursa was 7, she was having a sleepover with her best friend. Her friend fell asleep during a movie, but Ursa stayed awake to watch. Out of nowhere, Ursa's friend randomly sat straight up in bed, looked directly at her with wide eyes, and she simply said, "Be careful." After a few seconds of silence, Ursa asked, "Of what?" A few more seconds passed before she simply said, "People," before immediately falling back asleep.
In 10th grade, Gooby would overhear her friend say some pretty weird stuff. During math, she asked someone next to her about playing Club Penguin. Their response was to ask, "What's Club Penguin?" So Gooby's friend yelled, "You are the biggest disgrace of my life!" Another time, walked into class late after returning from a doctor's appointment and heard the words, "Water is wet because it is basically the god of wetness." Gooby doesn't even know what that conversation was about, but that was the moment she decided she wanted to make friends with that girl. They've been good friends ever since.
Back when I was in middle school, me and my friends would wait at the entrance to our neighborhood for the school bus. Now, beside our bus stop was a crabapple tree, so what we would do is we'd pick the tiny apples off the tree, and we'd put them in the street, and as cars would drive by, they would make the apples go and explode. It was just something we did to pass the time. Well, we did this for about a few weeks, and one day, this unmarked police car pulled up, and then another police car pulled up, and another, and all of us were arrested. We were taken up to the school. We were charged with apparently trying to cause an accident or something. The police officer said that we were throwing the apples at cars, which we were not doing. And all of us got suspended for 10 days. Now, the guy who reported us was apparently my neighbor who lived 2 houses over. And the only reason why he did is because apparently when he was trying to pull into the neighborhood, he was on a motorcycle and he almost slipped on one of the apples. So, yeah, it was pretty interesting being walked into school with a bunch of police officers surrounding me and my friends. That was kind of cool, I guess, and then having to go meet with the principal and all the staff and getting suspended. That was quite a time. I got in a lot of trouble with my parents.
When Ramona was in the 4th grade, she was washing her hands in the bathroom when someone screamed and ran out of the toilet stall. She asked what was wrong and the girl shouted to get away from the handicap stall. Instead of walking away like a normal person, she turned around and saw a pure white ghost with no legs below her knees. Her hair was up in a high bun and she had a single drop of blood dripping from her mouth. Oh, and she also had no eyes. Ramona screamed and both of the students ran as far away from the bathrooms as they could possibly run.
Last summer, Zaraganba got a job as a lifeguard at a public pool. One day, while he was supervising the pool, his boss came to him and said, "Hey, if you go and kick that kid into the pool, I'll double your salary." At the time, Zaraganba was desperate for money, so he went over and kicked the kid. The only problem was, the kid didn't actually fall into the pool. And when he turned around, Zaraganba realized the kid was actually really jacked. He was so mad about being kicked that he kneed Zaraganba in the head, knocking him unconscious. When he woke up, he was in the hospital. The worst part was, his boss didn't even double his salary.
Pringle was on the late bus home. There weren't many people on the bus, so he took his seat and began to read a book. At the next stop, a guy got on the bus, plainly holding a cigarette, yet the driver let him on anyway. The guy chose the seat right behind him. Every time he inhaled on the cigarette, he would then exhale smoke all onto Pringle's head. As his stop approached, Pringle picked up his bag when he suddenly felt a searing pain on the top of his head. He quickly realised that the man had tried to put his cigarette out on Pringle's head, and acting on pure instinct, he turned and punched him in the face. The bus driver didn't notice a thing, and he got off the bus and went home.
When Sweet Commando was 13, he went somewhere to eat with his grandfather after helping him fix his car. In the restaurant, some pretty girls were giggling and waving at him, and, well, being a teenage boy, he smiled and waved back. When they got back to the house, Sweet Commando's dad told him that there were holes in his pants. He looked down and there were 2 holes on either side of his crotch, the size of fists. He then realized why those girls were giggling and waving at him. He was just glad that he at least had underpants on. When Honey Bits was in high school, she and her crush Ursa went on a trip to Disneyland for a choir competition. Ursa loved roller coasters, but Honey Bits was terrified of heights. To impress Ursa, Honey Bits, she took 3 times her normal dose of anxiety pills. She figured this would counteract her fear of heights, but all it did was make her really sick. Honey Bits had overdose symptoms all day. Her body was sweaty, she couldn't stop shaking, but she still braved the roller coasters just to sit next to Ursa. Ursa knew Honey Bits was trying to impress her, so she held her hand to get her through the symptoms. They ended up having a great day, and they've been together ever since.